The dust kicked up in golden swirls as Luther Reed guided his wagon along the rutted path toward Randsburg, California, his eyes scanning the horizon with the practiced wariness of a man who had known solitude for far too long. It was August of 1898, and the heat pressed down on everything like a heavy hand, making even the Joshua trees seem to wilt in defeat. Luther had been riding since dawn, coming back from delivering cattle to a buyer in Johannesburg, and his throat felt like sandpaper despite the water he had been rationing from his canteen. He was thinking about the empty ranch house waiting for him, about the silence that would greet him when he opened the door, when he spotted something that made him pull on the reins. A young woman sat beneath a makeshift canopy of faded canvas stretched between two wooden posts, and before her on a weathered plank table sat perhaps 24 eggs in a collection of mismatched baskets. She wore a dress that had once been blue but had faded to something closer to gray, and her dark hair was pulled back severely from a face that would have been lovely if not for the bruise yellowing along her left cheekbone. She did not look up as his wagon approached, keeping her eyes fixed on the dusty road as though willing customers to appear through sheer force of concentration. Luther brought his horses to a stop and climbed down, his boots hitting the packed earth with a solid thud. The woman flinched at the sound, then slowly raised her eyes to meet his. They were the color of honey in sunlight, those eyes, and they held a wariness that spoke of hard experience and harder treatment. "Good afternoon, miss," Luther said, removing his hat as his mother had taught him to do in the presence of ladies. "Hot day to be sitting out here." "Yes, sir." Her voice was soft, almost musical despite the obvious exhaustion in it. "Would you be interested in buying some eggs?" "They are fresh, laid this morning." Luther stepped closer and examined the eggs. They did indeed look fresh, and he could always use eggs, though he certainly did not need 24 of them. But something about the desperation in her posture, the way her hands twisted together in her lap, made him reach for his money pouch. "How much for the lot?" he asked. Her eyes widened slightly. "All of them, sir." "Every last one." "That would be $3, sir." She named the price as though she expected him to laugh and walk away. Luther counted out the coins without hesitation, placing them on the table. As he did, he noticed the raw skin around her wrists, marks that could only have come from rope or shackles. His jaw tightened, but he kept his voice even. "You live around here, miss?" She hesitated before answering, her eyes darting to the road behind him. "I work for the Olson family about 2 miles south. They send me out here most days to sell what the chickens produce." The Olsons. Luther knew the name, though he had never met the family personally. They had a reputation in Randsburg for being difficult people, the kind who kept to themselves, and were known to take on indentured servants from folks who fell on hard times. "You are working off a debt, then?" The woman's face went carefully blank, but he saw the answer in the way her shoulders tensed. "Yes, sir. My family owed them money. When my parents died of fever 2 years ago, the debt fell to me." Luther began loading the baskets of eggs into his wagon with more care than such a task usually required, his mind working through the implications. Indentured servitude was still legal in California, though it was falling out of favor in most places. Some families used it fairly, offering honest work in exchange for legitimate debts. Others used it as a polite word for something much closer to slavery. "What is your name?" he asked, not looking at her as he secured the last basket. "Olivia." "Olivia Owens." "Luther Reed." He turned back to face her. "How much is your debt, Miss Owens?" The question seemed to startle her. "Sir? How much do you owe the Olsons?" Olivia stood slowly, confusion and something that might have been hope warring in her expression. "I do not see how that is your concern, Mr. Reed." "Humor me." She bit her lower lip, clearly uncertain whether to answer. Finally, she said, "The original debt was $140, but with interest and the cost of my food and board, Mr. Olson says it now stands at $370. I have been working for them for nearly 2 years, and the debt never seems to get smaller." Luther had seen this kind of arrangement before. The Olsons would be charging her for every scrap of food, every thread of clothing, adding interest at whatever rate they chose, ensuring that she would never be able to work her way free. It was legal but despicable, and the bruise on Olivia's face suggested that the unfairness was not the worst of what she endured. "I will give you $400 for her contract," Luther said, the words coming out before he had fully thought them through. Olivia's hand flew to her mouth. "Sir, you cannot be serious." "I am perfectly serious." And he was, Luther realized. Something about this young woman, about the courage it took to sit out here day after day selling eggs for people who would never let her go, moved something in his chest that had been still for a very long time. "Wait here." He climbed back onto his wagon and turned the horses south, following Olivia's directions to the Olson property. She had tried to protest, but he had insisted she stay with the egg stand and canvas, saying he would send someone to fetch her once the business was concluded. The truth was, he did not want her there when he confronted the Olsons. He had a feeling it might get ugly. The Olson farm was exactly what he expected. A ramshackle collection of buildings that had seen better days, with chickens scratching in the dirt and a few skinny pigs rooting around in a pen made of mismatched boards. A man emerged from the house as Luther brought his wagon to a stop, a tall figure with a face like a hatchet and eyes that assessed Luther's clothes and wagon with the speed of long practice. "Help you?" The man's tone suggested that helping was the last thing he wanted to do. "Are you Mr. Olson?" "Depends on who is asking." Luther climbed down from the wagon, making sure to keep his movements slow and unthreatening despite the anger building in his gut. "My name is Luther Reed. I own a ranch about 10 miles north of Randsburg. I just met Miss Olivia Owens on the road." Olson's expression hardened. "That girl is supposed to be selling eggs, not gossiping with strangers." "She was doing exactly what she was supposed to be doing," Luther said evenly. "I bought all her eggs. While I was there, we got to talking about her situation. I understand she is working off a family debt." "That is right, and it is none of your concern. I want to buy her contract." Olson stared at him for a long moment, then let out a bark of laughter that held no humor. "You want to buy her contract? What for? You got plans for that girl?" Luther felt his hands curl into fists but forced them to relax. "My plans are my business. Her debt stands at $370 as I understand it. I am prepared to offer you $400 right now in cash." The laughter died from Olson's face, replaced by a calculating look. $400 is a lot of money." "Yes, it is. It is also $30 more than what she owes you. Take it or leave it." Olson scratched his jaw, his eyes never leaving Luther's face. "That girl has caused me no end of trouble. Crying all the time, refusing to do certain work when I tell her to do it. Been nothing but a burden, truth be told." Luther understood exactly what kind of work Olivia had been refusing, and it took every ounce of his self-control not to plant his fist in Olson's face. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his money pouch. "Do we have a deal or not?" Greed won out over whatever else Olson might have been thinking. "We have a deal, but I want it in writing, proper-like. Come inside and I will get the papers." The inside of the Olson house smelled of old grease and unwashed bodies. A woman sat in the corner doing needlework, her face as pinched and mean as her husband's. She looked up when they entered but said nothing, just watched with cold eyes as Olson rummaged through a battered desk until he found the papers he was looking for. The contract was exactly as exploitative as Luther had feared, with interest rates that bordered on usury and charges for Olivia's upkeep that were clearly inflated. But it was legal, stamped by a magistrate in Randsburg, and when Olson signed it over to Luther in exchange for $400 in gold and silver coins, the transaction was binding. "Pleasure doing business with you," Olson said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I will tell the girl to gather her things." "She does not have any things at your property," Luther said. "She is already waiting by the road. You have been paid in full. Our business is concluded." He left before Olson could respond, climbing back onto his wagon and guiding the horses back toward where Olivia waited. The sun had moved lower in the sky, and the heat had begun to ease into something more bearable. He found Olivia exactly where he had left her, sitting in the shade of her canvas, though she stood as soon as his wagon came into view. "Well?" she asked as he pulled up beside her. Her face was pale and her hands were trembling. Luther held up the signed contract. "You are free, Miss Owens. Your debt has been paid in full." She stared at the paper as though it might bite her. "You actually did it. You bought my contract." "I did." "But why? You do not even know me." Luther folded the contract carefully and tucked it into his pocket, because it was the right thing to do. And because nobody should have to live the way the Olsons were making you live. Tears spilled down Olivia's cheeks, and she did not bother to wipe them away. "I do not understand. What do you want from me?" "Nothing you are not willing to give," Luther said firmly. "But I could use some help around my ranch if you are interested in honest work for honest wages. You would have your own room, your own space. I would pay you $15 a month plus room and board. And if at any time you decide you want to leave, you are free to do so. The contract I just bought, consider it void. You owe me nothing." Olivia was openly weeping now, her whole body shaking. Luther climbed down from the wagon and stood awkwardly nearby, unsure what to do. He was not accustomed to being around crying women. His mother had died when he was 12, and he had been alone on his ranch for the better part of 6 years, ever since his father had passed from a heart ailment. "I am sorry," Olivia managed between sobs. "I just cannot believe this is real." "It is real," Luther said gently. "You are free, Miss Owens, and you are going to be all right." She nodded, wiping at her face with the sleeve of her faded dress. "I accept your offer, Mr. Reed. I will work for you. I will work hard, I promise. I believe you." He helped her fold up the canvas and load the makeshift table and posts into the back of his wagon, then offered her his hand to help her climb up onto the seat beside him. She hesitated only a moment before taking it, her palms small and rough with calluses against his own work-hardened hand. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon wheels creaking over the uneven ground. The landscape around Randsburg was harsh and beautiful in equal measure, all gold-brown hills and scattered vegetation, with mountains rising in the distance. It was country that could kill the unprepared, but Luther had been born here and knew its moods like he knew his own face. "Your ranch," Olivia said finally, her voice tentative. "What kind of ranch is it?" "Cattle, mostly. I have about 200 head right now, plus some horses. It is not a large operation, but it is mine. My father built it from nothing, and I have been working to expand it since he died." He glanced at her. "It gets lonely out there, I will not lie. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away, and I do not get into Randsburg more than once a week or so. If you need more society than that, I can drive you to town whenever you like." "Lonely sounds wonderful after the Olsons," Olivia said with feeling. "They had me sleeping in the chicken coop, Mr. Reed, an actual chicken coop with the birds. They said it was all they could spare, that I should be grateful for the roof over my head. Luther's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. You will have a proper room at my place. The house has 3 bedrooms. I use one, and the other 2 have been sitting empty since my father died. You can have whichever one you prefer. Thank you. The words were simple, but they carried a weight of emotion that made Luther's chest tighten. The sun was painting the sky in shades of orange and pink by the time they reached Luther's ranch. The property was marked by a wooden gate with Reed Ranch carved into the crossbeam, and beyond it stretched acres of grazing land dotted with cattle. The house itself was modest but well-maintained, a one-story structure built of wood and adobe with a wide porch facing east to catch the morning sun. Luther helped Olivia down from the wagon and carried the baskets of eggs inside while she stood on the porch, looking around with wide eyes. The interior of the house was plainly furnished, but clean, with a large main room that served as both kitchen and living space, and 3 doors leading to the bedrooms, and a small washroom that Luther's father had been particularly proud of. "This is beautiful," Olivia said, running her hand along the back of one of the wooden chairs that flanked the dining table. "It is home," Luther said. He set the egg baskets on the counter and turned to face her. "Come on, I will show you the bedrooms." The 2 spare rooms were nearly identical, each containing a bed with a simple frame, a wardrobe, a small table with a washing basin, and a window that looked out over different parts of the property. Olivia chose the one that faced south, toward the mountains, and stood at the window for a long moment just looking out. "I can see for miles," she said softly. "At the Olsons, all I could see from the chicken coop was the wall of their barn." Luther felt another surge of anger at the Olsons but pushed it aside. Olivia was here now, safe, and that was what mattered. "I will let you get settled. There should be some clothes in the wardrobe that belonged to my mother. She was about your size. You are welcome to anything that fits until we can get you some new things." Olivia turned to face him, her honey-colored eyes bright. "You have already done so much. I do not know how I will ever repay you." "By living a good life," Luther said. "That is payment enough." He left her then, closing the door gently behind him. In the kitchen, he set about making dinner, a simple meal of beans and salt pork that was standard fare for him. He was adding water to the pot when he heard Olivia emerge from her room. He glanced up and felt his breath catch slightly. She had changed into one of his mother's dresses, a simple calico print in shades of brown and cream. It fit her well, showing that she had a slender but curved figure that her old sack-like dress had hidden. More than that, she had washed her face and done something different with her hair, pulling it back more loosely so that soft tendrils framed her face. Without the grime of the road and the shadow of fear, she was genuinely lovely. "I hope it is all right that I used some of the water from the pump outside to wash up," she said, seeming suddenly self-conscious under his gaze. "Of course. This is your home now, too." Luther forced himself to look back at the pot on the stove. "I am not much of a cook, I am afraid. But I can manage beans and pork without burning them too badly." "I can cook," Olivia offered. "If you would like, I can take over the meals. I am quite good at it, actually. My mother taught me before she died." "I would not say no to that," Luther admitted, "but not tonight. Tonight you are a guest." They ate together at the table as the last light faded from the sky and Luther lit the oil lamps. The conversation was stilted at first, both of them uncertain how to navigate this strange new situation, but gradually it began to flow more naturally. Olivia told him about her parents, who had been honest farmers until a bad drought and worse decisions had left them in debt to the Olsons. Luther talked about his own family, about his mother who had loved this harsh land despite its challenges, and his father who had taught him everything about ranching. You ever wish you had gone somewhere else? Olivia asked. Somewhere easier with more people. Luther considered the question. Sometimes, he admitted. Especially after my father died. The loneliness can be hard, but this is my land, my legacy. I cannot imagine doing anything else. I think I understand that, Olivia said. The need to hold on to something that matters even when it is difficult. After dinner, Olivia insisted on washing the dishes despite Luther's protests. He found himself watching her as she worked, noting the efficient way she moved, the straightness of her spine. She had been broken down by the Olsons, but she had not been broken. There was strength in her, a resilience that he found himself admiring. I should warn you, he said as she dried the last plate. I get up early. Before dawn, usually. I will try to be quiet, but the roosters are not particularly considerate. Olivia smiled, and Luther was struck by how the expression transformed her face. I have been getting up before dawn for 2 years, Mr. Reed. I doubt your roosters can be worse than the Olsons' chickens pecking at me through the slats of that coop. Please, he said, call me Luther. Mr. Reed was my father. Luther, she repeated as though trying out the sound of it. Then you must call me Olivia. Olivia, he agreed. That night, lying in his bed with a wall between him and the young woman he had rescued, Luther found himself unable to sleep. He kept thinking about the way Olivia's eyes had lit up when she saw the mountains from her window, about the marks on her wrists from the Olsons' ropes, about the smile that had brightened her whole face. He had bought her freedom on impulse, moved by a compassion he had not known he still possessed after years of solitary living. But now that she was here, he was beginning to realize that his life had changed in ways he had not anticipated. He did not believe in love at first sight. His parents had married for practical reasons and learned to love each other over time, and he had always assumed his own life would follow a similar pattern if he ever found someone willing to share it. But there was something about Olivia that called to him, that made him want to be better, to do better, to build something more than just a successful ranch. These were dangerous thoughts for a man who had just promised a woman that she owed him nothing, that she was free to leave whenever she chose. Luther forced himself to push them aside. Olivia had been through enough without him complicating her new freedom with unwanted romantic feelings. He would be her employer, her protector if she needed one. And if she chose to stay and something more developed between them naturally over time, then he would deal with that when it happened. Having settled that in his mind, Luther finally drifted off to sleep. He woke, as always, before dawn and dressed quietly in the dark. When he emerged from his room, he was surprised to find Olivia already in the kitchen with a lamp lit, working at the stove. The smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the air. "You are up early," he said, moving to the wash basin to splash water on his face. "Old habits," Olivia said. "Besides, you have been kind enough to give me a home. The least I can do is make sure you have a proper breakfast before you start your work." Luther could not remember the last time someone had cooked breakfast for him. The simple act filled him with a warmth that had nothing to do with the heat from the stove. "Thank you," he said. "That is very kind." They ate together as the sky began to lighten outside, and then Luther headed out to begin his work. The cattle needed checking, fences needed mending, and a dozen other tasks awaited his attention. Normally, he would have faced the day with resignation, knowing it would be long and lonely. But today, he found himself working with unexpected energy, aware that when he returned to the house for midday dinner, there would be someone there waiting. Olivia proved herself invaluable over the following days. She took over the cooking entirely, and Luther found himself eating better than he had in years. She cleaned the house, mended his clothes, and tended a small vegetable garden that she started near the house. But more than the practical help, It was her presence that transformed the ranch. The house felt alive again, the way it had when his mother was still living. There was laughter and conversation, and Luther found himself hurrying through his work so he could get back to the house sooner. They settled into a comfortable routine. Luther would rise before dawn and do his morning chores, then return for the breakfast Olivia prepared. They would talk over their coffee, sharing stories and observations about the day ahead. Then Luther would head back out to work the ranch while Olivia managed the house and began taking over some of the lighter outdoor tasks like feeding the chickens and collecting eggs. They would come together again for dinner in the evening, and afterward they would sit on the porch watching the sunset, their conversation flowing easily. 3 weeks after Olivia arrived, Luther made his weekly trip into Randsburg to buy supplies, and this time she accompanied him. The town was small but bustling, a mining community that had sprung up in the 1890s when gold was discovered in the area. It consisted of a main street lined with businesses, several saloons, a church, and a scattering of homes that spread out from the center like spokes on a wheel. Luther took Olivia to the general store first, where he insisted on buying her several new dresses, undergarments, shoes, and other necessities despite her protests. The storekeeper, a friendly woman named Mrs. Harrison, helped Olivia pick out fabrics and ready-made items that would suit her, chatting pleasantly about nothing in particular. But Luther did not miss the curious looks Mrs. Harrison kept shooting his way, clearly wondering about the young woman he had brought to town. The speculation would start now, Luther knew. Randsburg was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business, or thought they did. By evening, half the town would be talking about Luther Reed and his new housekeeper, and by tomorrow the other half would have heard. There would be gossip, possibly unkind gossip, about their living arrangement. "Let me buy you a meal at the hotel restaurant," Luther said as they loaded their purchases into the wagon. "I am tired of my own cooking, and I imagine you would not mind a break from it either." Olivia hesitated. "People are already staring at us. Are you sure you want to give them more to talk about?" "Let them talk," Luther said firmly. "You have done nothing wrong, and neither have I. If people want to think poorly of us, that says more about them than it does about us." The hotel restaurant was nearly full when they entered, and Luther felt the weight of multiple stares as he guided Olivia to a table near the window. But he kept his head high and his manner easy, greeting the few people he knew with polite nods. A waitress came to take their order, a young woman who looked at Olivia with undisguised curiosity. They ordered pot roast and vegetables, and while they waited for the food to arrive, Luther found himself studying Olivia across the table. She had bloomed in the past 3 weeks, her skin taking on a healthy glow and her eyes losing some of their haunted quality. She wore one of her new dresses, a pretty green calico that brought out gold flecks in her honey-colored eyes, and she had styled her dark hair in a way that made her look both elegant and approachable. "You are staring," she said softly, a hint of color rising in her cheeks. "I apologize," Luther said, though he did not look away. "I was just thinking how well you look. Happy." "I am happy," Olivia said. "For the first time in a very long time I am genuinely happy, and it is all because of you, not all because of me," Luther objected. "You have worked hard to build this new life, but you made it possible." She reached across the table and placed her hand over his, a gesture that sent electricity running up Luther's arm. "I will never be able to thank you enough for what you did." Luther turned his hand over so their palms met, his fingers curling around hers. "Olivia, I need to tell you something." She looked at him questioningly, and he found himself suddenly uncertain how to proceed. He had not planned this, had told himself he would wait longer before saying anything. but sitting here with her hand in his, with the warm light of the restaurant lamps turning her face golden, he could not hold back. "These past 3 weeks have been the happiest I have known since my father died," he said. "Maybe even before that. Having you at the ranch, sharing meals with you, talking with you every day, it has made me realize how much I was just going through the motions before. You have brought life back to that place, and to me." Olivia's eyes widened, and he saw hope and fear warring in them. "Luther, what are you saying?" "I am saying that I have feelings for you," Luther said, the words coming easier now that he had started. "Romantic feelings. I know it has only been a few weeks, and I know you have been through hell and probably need time to figure out what you want. I am not asking you for anything. I just needed you to know how I feel." For a long moment, Olivia said nothing, just stared at their joined hands. Then she looked up at him, and there were tears in her eyes. "I have feelings for you too," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I have been trying not to, trying to tell myself it was too soon and that you were just being kind. But every time you come back to the house and smile at me, every time we sit on the porch and talk until the stars come out, I feel something I have never felt before. Is it too soon? Maybe. But that does not make it any less real." Luther felt his heart expand in his chest, a sensation so powerful it was almost painful. "Olivia, I am scared," she interrupted. "I am scared that I will wake up and this will all have been a dream. I am scared that somehow the Olsons will come and take me back. I am scared that you will change your mind about me." "I will not change my mind," Luther said with absolute certainty. "And the Olsons have no claim on you. You are free, Olivia, free to choose your own path. And if you choose to walk it with me, I promise I will do everything in my power to make you happy." Their food arrived then, interrupting the moment, but Luther did not let go of Olivia's hand until the waitress had set down their plates and departed. They ate slowly, trading glances across the table, the air between them charged with new possibility. The ride back to the ranch seemed to take half as long as the journey into town had. They sat close together on the wagon seat, their shoulders touching with the movement of the vehicle, and Luther found himself hyper-aware of every point of contact. When they reached the house and he helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingered at her waist perhaps longer than was strictly necessary. "Luther," Olivia said as they stood there in the yard with the evening stars beginning to emerge overhead, "may I ask you something? Anything?" "Will you kiss me?" Luther felt his breath catch. "Are you sure? I do not want to rush you into anything." "I am sure," Olivia said firmly. "I have been waiting for 3 weeks for you to kiss me, and I am tired of waiting." Luther smiled, then bent his head and captured her lips with his. The kiss was gentle at first, exploratory, but as Olivia's arms came up to wrap around his neck, it deepened into something more passionate. Luther pulled her closer, one hand splaying across the small of her back while the other cupped the side of her face. She tasted of the sweet tea they had drunk with dinner, and she felt perfect in his arms, like she had been made to fit there. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Olivia rested her forehead against Luther's chest, and he could feel the rapid beating of her heart against his own. "Well," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. "That was worth waiting for." Luther laughed, a sound of pure joy that startled him with its intensity. He could not remember the last time he had laughed like that, from a place of genuine happiness rather than polite obligation. "We should go inside," he said reluctantly. "It is getting late." They unloaded their purchases from town, working together in comfortable silence, occasionally brushing against each other in ways that sent sparks through Luther's nervous system. When everything was put away, they stood awkwardly in the main room, suddenly uncertain how to proceed. "I should probably go to bed," Olivia said, though she made no move toward her room. Probably, Luther agreed, equally motionless. Olivia laughed, and the sound broke the tension. This is strange, is it not? We have been living together for 3 weeks, but now that we have admitted our feelings, suddenly everything feels different. Strange but good, Luther said. He crossed to her and took both her hands in his. Olivia, I meant what I said. I care for you deeply. But I also want to do this right. Court you properly, give you time to be sure this is what you want. I do not want you to feel pressured because I gave you a place to live. You are a good man, Luther Raid, Olivia said softly. A truly good man, and yes, I would like to be courted properly. But I already know what my answer will be when you eventually ask the question I hope you are going to ask. Oh, Luther's heart was pounding. And what question would that be? You will have to wait and see, Olivia said with a smile. She rose on her tiptoes and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek, then slipped away to her room before he could respond. Luther stood in the empty room for a long moment, a grin spreading across his face. Then he went to his own bed, where he lay awake for hours thinking about the future and all the possibilities it now held. The next weeks passed in a golden haze of happiness. Luther continued his work on the ranch, but now Olivia often accompanied him, learning about the cattle and the land. He taught her to ride, first on his gentlest mare, then on increasingly spirited horses as her confidence grew. They would ride out together to check the fences or move the cattle to fresh grazing, and these hours spent side by side in the vast landscape became some of Luther's most treasured memories. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and Luther would tell her about his dreams for the ranch, about expanding the herd and maybe raising horses as a side business. Olivia would share her own ideas, suggesting ways to improve the garden or talking about the possibility of getting some milk cows. They were building a future together in these conversations, planning a life that intertwined their individual hopes into something shared. Luther also began taking Olivia into town more regularly, partly for supplies and partly to establish her presence in the community. They attended church services on Sundays, sitting together in one of the back pews, and afterward they would stay for the social hour where members of the congregation gathered to talk and share news. Some people were kind, welcoming Olivia without reservation. Others were more reserved, clearly uncertain what to make of the situation. It was after one such church service, about 2 months after Olivia had come to live at the ranch, that trouble arrived in the form of Jonas Olson. Luther and Olivia were standing outside the church, talking with Mrs. Harrison when Olson rode up on a sway-backed horse, his face set in hard lines. He dismounted and stalked toward them, ignoring the curious looks from the other congregants. "Raid," he barked. "I need to talk to you." Luther felt Olivia tense beside him and placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "Mr. Olson, what can I do for you? You can give me back my property," Olson snarled. "That girl you stole from me." A murmur ran through the gathered crowd. Luther kept his voice calm and level, though anger was building in his gut. "I did not steal anything. I paid you $400 for Miss Owen's contract, a sum that exceeded her debt to you. We signed papers. The transaction was legal and binding." "I have been thinking about that," Olson said. "I did not get a fair price. That girl was worth more than $400. I want her back or I want proper compensation." "The deal is done," Luther said firmly. "Miss Owens no longer has any obligation to you. If you have a legal grievance, take it up with the magistrate, but you will not be harassing her or me." Olson took a step closer, his hands clenching into fists. "You think you can just come along and steal what is mine? That girl was my property, bought and paid for." "I was never your property," Olivia said, her voice shaking but determined. "I was a person working off a debt, and that debt has been paid. You have no claim on me." "You shut your mouth, girl. I was not talking to you." Olson raised his hand as though to strike her, but Luther stepped between them so quickly that Olson stumbled backward. "You will not touch her," Luther said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "Not now, not ever. If you lay a hand on her, you will answer to me." Several of the men from the congregation had moved closer now, forming a loose circle around the confrontation. Luther recognized the blacksmith, Samuel Redmond, and the owner of the general store, Thomas Green. Both men looked ready to intervene if necessary. "Mr. Olson," Thomas Green said, his voice carrying authority despite his mild appearance, "Luther is right. If you sold Miss Owen's contract, then the matter is settled. Making threats will not change that." "This is none of your business, Green," Olson spat. "Actually, it is," Samuel Redmond said. The blacksmith was a large man with arms like tree trunks, and his presence was intimidating even when he was being friendly. Right now, he was decidedly not friendly. "We all heard what you said about that young lady being your property. California outlawed slavery more than 40 years ago, and even indentured servitude has rules about treatment. Maybe we should get the magistrate down here and have him review how you have been running your operation." Olson's face went red, then pale. He looked around at the circle of hostile faces and seemed to realize he had overplayed his hand. "This is not over, Reed," he said, pointing a shaking finger at Luther. "You have not heard the last of this." He mounted his horse and rode away, kicking the poor animal's flanks harder than necessary. The crowd watched him go, then slowly began to disperse, though many people stopped to offer words of support to Luther and Olivia. "That man is poison," Mrs. Harrison said, shaking her head. "Everyone knows what he and his wife are like, but nobody has been willing to do anything about it." "Good for you for getting that poor girl away from them." "Thank you," Luther said. He looked down at Olivia, who had gone pale and was trembling slightly. "Come on, let us go home." They made their excuses and left, climbing into the wagon and heading back to the ranch. Olivia was quiet during the ride, staring at her hands in her lap, and Luther could see her mind working through the encounter. "He cannot take you back," Luther said finally, unable to bear her silence any longer. "You understand that, right? The law is on our side." "I know," Olivia said quietly. "But the law did not stop him from beating me when I refused to do what he wanted. The law did not stop him from keeping me in that chicken coop. Jonas Olson does not care about the law unless it serves him." "He cannot hurt you now," Luther said firmly. "I will not allow it." "You cannot watch me every moment of every day," Olivia pointed out. "What if he comes to the ranch when you are out with the cattle? What if he waits until we are apart and then tries something?" Luther had been thinking the same thing, and he did not like the conclusions he was reaching. "Then we make sure you are never alone and unprotected. I will teach you to shoot, and you will carry a gun when I am not nearby. And I will spread the word among our neighbors to keep an eye out. Olson is not a popular man. People will help us." "I do not want to live in fear," Olivia said, her voice breaking. "I finally have a life worth living, and now he is trying to take that away." Luther pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her fully. "He will not take anything from you," he said. "I promise you that. We will deal with this together, whatever it takes." Olivia searched his face, then nodded slowly. "Together," she repeated. When they reached the ranch, Luther spent the afternoon teaching Olivia how to load, aim, and fire his spare revolver. She was a quick learner, her hands steady despite her earlier fear. By the time the sun was setting, she could hit a target at 20 paces more often than not. "Good," Luther said approvingly. "Keep that gun with you. In your apron pocket when you are working around the house. in a holster if you are outside. And if Olson or anyone else threatens you, you shoot first and ask questions later. Understand? I understand, Olivia said. She looked down at the gun in her hand, then back at Luther. Do you think he will really come here? I do not know, Luther admitted, but I would rather be prepared. They went inside as darkness fell, and Luther made sure all the doors and windows were secured. He moved his own gun closer to his bed, and he found himself sleeping lightly, waking at every sound. But the night passed without incident, as did the next day and the day after that. A week went by, then two. The confrontation with Olson began to feel less immediate, though Luther remained vigilant and made sure Olivia kept the revolver close. They fell back into their routine, but now there was an edge of wariness that had not been there before. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, nearly 3 weeks after the church incident, that everything came to a head. Luther had ridden out to check on a section of fence that had been damaged by a fallen tree, leaving Olivia at the house with instructions to fire 2 shots in quick succession if she needed him. He had been gone perhaps an hour when he heard the unmistakable crack of gunfire echoing across the rangeland. 2 shots, then silence. Luther spurred his horse into a gallop, his heart pounding with terror. The ride back to the house felt like it took forever, though it could not have been more than 10 minutes. He came around the side of the house and pulled his horse to a rearing stop. Olivia stood in the yard with the revolver in her hand, pointed at Jonas Olson, who was lying on the ground clutching his leg and screaming obscenities. Mrs. Olson was with him, kneeling beside her husband and glaring up at Olivia with pure hatred. What happened? Luther demanded, dismounting and moving to Olivia's side. He came to take me back, Olivia said. Her voice was remarkably steady, though Luther could see her hands shaking. He and his wife drove up in their wagon and told me to get in. When I refused, he tried to grab me. I fired a warning shot into the air like you taught me, and when he kept coming, I shot him in the leg. You crazy girl, Mrs. Olson shrieked. You shot him. You could have killed him. I am a very good shot, Olivia said, her eyes never leaving Olson. If I had wanted to kill him, he would be dead. Now get off my property before I decide to correct that error. Luther felt a surge of pride so strong it almost overwhelmed him. This was not the frightened young woman he had found selling eggs by the road. This was someone who had discovered her own strength and was not afraid to use it. We are going to the law about this. Mrs. Olson raged as she helped her husband stand. He was still screaming, blood soaking through his pant leg, but Luther could see it was not a life-threatening wound. Olivia had shot him through the outer thigh, painful but not dangerous if treated properly. Good, Luther said coldly. Let us all go to the law, because I am sure the magistrate will be very interested to hear how you showed up at my property to kidnap a woman whose contract you legally sold. I am also sure he will want to discuss the conditions under which you were keeping Miss Owens, including the beatings and the chicken coop you called accommodation. The Olsons exchanged glances, and Luther saw calculation replace some of the rage in their eyes. They knew they were on dangerous ground legally. Get out, Luther said. Now, and if I ever see either of you on my property again, you will be dealing with me, and I am an even better shot than Miss Owens. The Olsons retreated to their wagon, Olson hobbling and cursing while his wife helped him up. They drove away at a pace that probably did not help Olson's wounded leg, and Luther watched until they were out of sight before turning to Olivia. She was still holding the gun, still staring at the spot where Olson had fallen. Luther gently took the revolver from her hand and holstered it, then pulled her into his arms. She collapsed against him, her whole body shaking now that the danger had passed. You did exactly right, Luther murmured into her hair. You protected yourself. I am so proud of you. I was so scared, Olivia admitted, her words muffled against his chest. When I saw them coming up the drive, I thought about running, hiding. But then I remembered what you said about not letting him take anything else from me, so I stood my ground. You were magnificent, Luther said. He pulled back enough to look into her face. Olivia Owens, you are the strongest, bravest woman I have ever known. She let out a shaky laugh. I shot a man who was trying to kidnap you. The law will see it as self-defense because that is exactly what it was. As if summoned by the mention of law, a rider appeared on the horizon. As he got closer, Luther recognized Deputy Marshal William Frost, a grizzled lawman in his 50s who covered the territory around Randsburg. He must have been in the area and heard the gunshots. Luther gave Olivia's shoulder a reassuring squeeze, then stepped forward to meet Frost. Deputy Reed, got reports of shooting. Frost dismounted and looked between Luther and Olivia, taking in their positions and the blood on the ground. Someone want to tell me what happened here? Luther and Olivia took turns explaining the situation, starting with how Luther had purchased Olivia's contract from the Olsons and ending with the attempted kidnapping. Frost listened without interruption, his weathered face unreadable. When they finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "You shot him in the leg." "Yes, sir," Olivia confirmed. "Could have killed him if you wanted." "Yes, sir. But you showed restraint." Frost nodded slowly. "That is good. Shows you were defending yourself, not trying to murder anyone." He turned to Luther. "You have the paperwork for the contract purchase. Inside the house. I will get it." Luther retrieved the papers and Frost studied them carefully. "This looks legal and proper," he said finally. "Signed, witnessed, paid in full. The Olsons have no claim on Miss Owens." He looked at Olivia. "You are in the clear, miss. This was a righteous shooting in defense of your person and your freedom. The Olsons try to say otherwise. I will testify to that myself." The relief that washed over Luther was so intense he felt momentarily light-headed. "Thank you, Deputy. No thanks necessary. Just doing my job." Frost remounted his horse. "If the Olsons give you any more trouble, you send word to me immediately. I think it is high time someone had a proper look at their operation. Might be some other folks being mistreated out there." After Frost left, Luther and Olivia stood together in the yard as the shadows lengthened. The adrenaline of the confrontation was fading, leaving exhaustion in its wake. "It is over," Olivia said wonderingly. "Truly over. They cannot take me back." "No," Luther agreed. "You are free in every sense of the word. They have no power over you anymore." Olivia turned to face him, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "I could not have done any of this without you. You gave me back my life." "You gave me back mine," Luther countered. "I was just existing before you came here. Now I am living." "Luther," Olivia said softly, "ask me." "Ask you what?" "The question you have been thinking about for weeks now. The one you are too much of a gentleman to ask because you think I need more time. Ask me." Luther felt his heart start to race. "Are you sure? It has only been a few months." "I have never been more sure of anything in my life," Olivia said. "Ask me," Luther rayed. He took her hands in his, holding them gently. "Olivia Owens, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner in all things? Will you help me build this ranch into something greater, raise a family with me, grow old with me under these wide skies?" "Yes," Olivia said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes to all of it. Yes forever." Luther pulled her into a kiss that was different from the others they had shared, deeper and more binding, a promise sealed with their bodies as well as their words. When they finally broke apart, the sun was setting in a spectacular display of orange and red, painting the sky like fire. They married a month later in the small church in Randsburg, with what seemed like half the town in attendance. Word of the Olsons' attempted kidnapping and Olivia's brave defense had spread, turning her into something of a local hero. More importantly, Deputy Frost had made good on his implied threat to investigate the Olson operation, and had discovered 3 other indentured servants being kept in conditions similar to what Olivia had endured. The Olsons had been arrested and their farm seized pending trial, and the general consensus in Randsburg was that they would be spending considerable time in prison. Luther wore his best suit, cleaned and pressed until it looked almost new, and Olivia wore a wedding dress that Mrs. Harrison and several other ladies from the church had helped her sew. It was made of white muslin with lace at the collar and cuffs, simple but beautiful. When Luther saw her walking down the aisle, her hair arranged in an elegant updo and her honey-colored eyes shining with happiness, he felt his throat tighten with emotion. The ceremony was conducted by Reverend Matthews, a kindly man in his 60s who had been serving the church for more than 20 years. He spoke about love and partnership, about building a life together through faith and mutual respect. When it came time for the vows, Luther spoke as clearly and firmly, meaning every word with all his heart. I, Luther Reed, take you, Olivia Owens, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, protect you, and cherish you for all the days of my life, in prosperity and hardship, in joy and sorrow, until death parts us. Olivia's vows were equally heartfelt. I, Olivia Owens, take you, Luther Reed, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, support you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. You gave me back my freedom and my hope, and I give you my heart in return, freely and completely, until death parts us. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, and told Luther he could kiss his bride, the resulting kiss was met with cheers and applause from the assembled congregation. Luther felt like his heart might burst from happiness as he led his new wife back down the aisle, smiling at the friendly faces around them. There was a reception afterward in the church hall, with food contributed by various families and music provided by a local group of musicians. Luther and Olivia danced together for the first time, whirling around the floor while everyone watched and clapped. Luther was not much of a dancer, but it did not matter. All that mattered was the woman in his arms, looking at him like he had hung the moon. As the evening wore on and the celebration showed no signs of slowing, Luther leaned down to whisper in Olivia's ear, "What do you say we slip away? I would like to have my wife to myself for a while." Olivia nodded eagerly, and they made their way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes as they went. They had decided to spend their wedding night at the hotel in Randsburg, rather than making the long drive back to the ranch in the dark, and Luther had reserved their finest room for the occasion. The hotel room was simple but clean, with a large bed covered in a handmade quilt and curtains that overlooked the main street. Someone, probably Mrs. Harrison, had left a vase of wildflowers on the dresser, adding a touch of beauty to the plain space. Luther closed the door behind them and turned to find Olivia looking nervous. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. "I am just a bit anxious," Olivia admitted. "I have never, that is, the Olsons tried once, but I fought them off, and since then I have not." Luther crossed to her and took her hands. "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for," he said firmly. "We have the rest of our lives together. There is no rush." "But I want to," Olivia said quickly. "I want to be your wife in every way. I am just nervous." "So am I," Luther confessed. "I have not exactly had extensive experience in this area myself. We will figure it out together, all right, and if you want to stop at any point, you just say so." Olivia nodded, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Together," she agreed. They undressed slowly, helping each other with buttons and laces, and Luther was careful to keep his movements gentle and unthreatening. When they finally came together in the bed, it was with tenderness and care, each of them focused on the other's comfort and pleasure. It was not perfect, this first joining. There was some awkwardness and uncertainty, moments where they had to stop and adjust or try a different approach. But it was loving and sweet, and when they finally lay together afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Luther felt a completeness he had never experienced before. "I love you," he murmured into Olivia's hair. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Olivia replied, her voice drowsy and content. "Thank you for being patient with me." "Always," Luther promised. "Always and forever." They slept late the next morning, a luxury neither of them usually allowed themselves, and when they finally rose and dressed, they took their time over breakfast at the hotel restaurant. Then they retrieved their wagon and made the journey back to the ranch, which somehow looked different now. It was not just Luther's ranch anymore. It was their ranch, their home, the foundation of their shared life. The first year of their marriage passed in a blur of hard work and happiness. Together they expanded the ranch, adding more cattle and starting the horse breeding operation Luther had dreamed about. Olivia proved to have a natural talent for working with animals, particularly the horses, and it was her patient gentling of a particularly spirited stallion that allowed them to start their breeding program successfully. They also became more involved in the Randsburg community. Luther joined the town council, while Olivia helped establish a small school for the children of outlying ranches and farms. They made friends, real friends, not just acquaintances, and their home became known as a place of hospitality where visitors were always welcome. In the spring of 1900, Olivia discovered she was pregnant. She broke the news to Luther over breakfast one morning, her face glowing with excitement and nervousness. "Are you sure?" Luther asked, standing so quickly that his chair fell over backward. He ignored it, moving around the table to kneel beside his wife. "As sure as I can be," Olivia said. "I have missed my monthly courses twice, and I have been feeling queasy in the mornings. Mrs. Harrison said those are the signs." Luther placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach, wonder filling him. "We are going to have a baby." "We are going to have a baby," Olivia confirmed, covering his hand with her own. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not begin to cover it," Luther said. He pulled her into a gentle embrace, mindful of her condition. "I am overjoyed, overwhelmed, terrified, all of it at once." Olivia laughed. "That sounds about right." The pregnancy progressed normally, though Luther fussed over Olivia constantly, trying to limit her work and make her rest more than she wanted to. She tolerated his hovering with good humor, understanding that it came from love rather than a desire to control her. As her belly swelled with their child, Luther found himself even more in love with her than before, marveling at the miracle of what her body was doing. In late November of 1900, with the first winter storms beginning to blow down from the mountains, Olivia went into labor. Luther sent for the midwife, a capable woman named Sarah Green who lived in Randsburg, and then spent the longest hours of his life pacing the main room while Olivia labored in their bedroom. He could hear her cries through the door, and each one felt like a knife to his heart. He wanted to be with her, but Sarah had gently but firmly told him that his place was outside, that he would only get in the way. Just before midnight he heard a new sound, the thin, wailing cry of a newborn baby. Luther froze, his heart hammering, waiting for he knew not what. Then the bedroom door opened and Sarah emerged, a tired but satisfied smile on her face. "You have a son, Mr. Reed, a healthy baby boy, and your wife did beautifully." Luther pushed past her into the bedroom. Olivia lay in the bed, looking exhausted but radiant with a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as Luther entered, and the smile that lit her face made him feel like he could fly. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Luther approached the bed slowly, almost reverently. He looked down at the baby in Olivia's arms and felt something fundamental shift inside him. The infant was tiny and red-faced, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that were still the vague blue of all newborns. He was perfect. "What should we name him?" Olivia asked. Luther thought for a moment. "What about Daniel? Daniel James Reed, after both our fathers." Olivia's eyes filled with tears. Her father's name had been Daniel and Luther's father had been James. "That is perfect," she whispered. Luther carefully took his son from Olivia's arms, supporting the small head the way Sarah showed him. Daniel was so light, so fragile seeming, and yet Luther could already see the potential in him, the man he would one day become. "Hello, Daniel," he said softly. "Welcome to the family." The early weeks with a newborn were challenging. Daniel needed to be fed frequently, and Olivia was exhausted from the demands of nursing. Luther did everything he could to help, taking over all the household chores and getting up in the night to change Daniel's diapers and bring him to Olivia for feeding. There were moments of frustration and exhaustion, times when they both wondered if they had any idea what they were doing. But there were also moments of indescribable joy, like when Daniel first smiled at them, or when he wrapped his tiny hand around Luther's finger and held on tight. As Daniel grew, so did the ranch. Luther hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased workload, good men who treated Olivia with respect and did their jobs well. The cattle herd expanded, the horse breeding program proved successful, and by 1902 the Reed Ranch was one of the more prosperous operations in the region. More importantly, Luther and Olivia's love continued to deepen and mature. They still made time for each other despite the demands of the ranch and parenthood, still sat on the porch in the evenings talking about their dreams. They had their disagreements, of course, as any married couple did. But they had learned to communicate honestly and work through their conflicts without letting them fester. In 1903, Olivia became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to a daughter they named Emma Grace, after Olivia's mother. Emma had her mother's honey-colored eyes and her father's stubborn determination, and from the moment she was born, she had both her parents wrapped around her tiny finger. 2 children were plenty to keep them busy, and Luther and Olivia decided that their family was complete. They threw themselves into raising Daniel and Emma, teaching them about the ranch and the land, about honesty and hard work and treating others with kindness. They watched their children grow with pride and wonder, marveling at the people they were becoming. In 1905, Deputy Marshal William Frost stopped by the ranch during one of his rounds through the territory. He had aged since Luther last saw him, his hair now completely gray and his face more lined, but his eyes were still sharp. "Heard you folks are doing well," Frost said, accepting the coffee Olivia poured for him. "Ranch is thriving, children are healthy, must feel good." "It feels like a blessing," Luther said honestly. "Every single day." "Wanted to let you know, in case you had not heard, Jonas Olson died in prison last year. Pneumonia, they said. His wife was released after serving her sentence, but she left California. Nobody knows where she went." Luther and Olivia exchanged glances. Luther reached for his wife's hand and she squeezed his fingers. "Thank you for telling us," Olivia said. "I will not pretend to mourn him, but I hope he found peace before the end." "You are a better person than me then," Frost said. "Man like that deserved what he got." He finished his coffee and stood. "Anyway, I wanted you to know, that chapter of your life is truly closed now." After Frost left, Luther found Olivia standing at the window of their bedroom looking out at the land. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking about how different my life could have been," Olivia said, "if you had not come along that day. If you had not decided to buy all those eggs and then do something crazy like purchase my freedom. I would probably still be with the Olsons, or I would be dead. Instead, I am here with you, with our children, living a life I never dared to dream about." "I was thinking something similar," Luther admitted. "About how lonely I was before you, how empty my life felt. You brought light into every corner of my existence, Olivia. You and the children are everything to me." She turned in his arms to face him. "We saved each other," she said. "That is what I believe. You saw someone who needed help and you stepped up, but I also gave you a reason to open your heart again, to let someone in. We saved each other." Luther kissed her then, a long, slow kiss that held all the love and gratitude he felt for this remarkable woman who had become his everything. The years continued to pass, marked by both joys and sorrows. In 1908, Daniel started school in Randsburg, making the journey into town each day on his pony. Emma followed 2 years later. Luther's small herd of horses had grown into a respected breeding program, and people came from all over California to buy his animals. Olivia expanded her kitchen garden into a real truck farm, selling vegetables in Randsburg and the surrounding communities. They celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, weathered droughts and harsh winters, dealt with sick cattle and broken fences and all the countless challenges that came with ranching. They also made time for joy, for family picnics by the creek that ran through their property, for trips to the state fair in San Bernardino, for lazy Sunday afternoons when they did nothing but be together. In 1912, when Daniel was 12 and Emma was 10, the children asked about how their parents had met. They were old enough now to understand more complex stories, and Luther and Olivia had been careful about what they shared up until this point, not wanting to burden them with the darker aspects of their mother's past. "Did you really shoot someone, Mama?" Emma asked, her eyes wide. Olivia looked at Luther, who nodded encouragingly. "I did," she said. "A bad man was trying to take me away from your father, and I defended myself. It was one of the scariest things I have ever done, but also one of the most important. It taught me that I was stronger than I thought." "And Papa bought you?" Daniel asked, trying to understand. "Like you buy a horse?" "Not exactly," Luther said carefully. "Your mother was working for some people who treated her badly. She had a debt that she owed them, and I paid off that debt so she could be free. Then I offered her an honest job on this ranch, and eventually we fell in love and got married." "So you saved her," Emma said, a romantic gleam in her eye. "We saved each other," Olivia corrected gently, echoing what she had told Luther years before. "Your father gave me my freedom, but I gave him something too. I gave him love and family and a reason to smile every day. That is how the best relationships work. You both give, and you both receive." The conversation stayed with Luther long after the children had gone to bed. He thought about the truth of Olivia's words, about how their love had been built on mutual respect and support, rather than one person rescuing the other. Yes, he had bought her freedom, but she had freed him too, from loneliness and isolation, and the narrow confines of a life lived only for work. In 1915, the Reed Ranch celebrated a milestone, 20 years since Olivia had first arrived. They threw a party, inviting friends and neighbors from all over the territory. The house and barn were decorated with bunting, and tables were set up in the yard groaning under the weight of food. There was music and dancing, and as Luther whirled Olivia around under the strings of lanterns they had hung from the trees, He felt like the luckiest man alive. 20 years, Olivia said, slightly breathless from the dancing. Can you believe it? Some days it feels like yesterday, Luther said. Other days it feels like you have always been here, like I cannot remember a time before you. I feel the same way, Olivia admitted. This life, this ranch, our children, you would all feel so right, like it was always meant to be this way. They danced until the musicians grew tired, until the lanterns began to gutter and die, until their guests started heading home with promises to visit again soon. Then they walked together to the porch where they had spent so many evenings talking and dreaming, and sat down side by side as they had done countless times before. You ever regret it? Luther asked quietly. Staying here, I mean, building a life in such an isolated place. Never, Olivia said firmly. This is where I found myself, Luther. This is where I learned what I was capable of, where I discovered that I could be strong and brave and worthy of love. This ranch, this life with you, it is everything I never knew I needed. I love you, Luther said, pulling her close. I have loved you since that first day, I think. When I saw you sitting by the road with those eggs, looking so determined and so lost at the same time. Something in my heart recognized you, recognized that you were important to my future even though I had just met you. I love you too, Olivia said. More than I have words to express. You are the best man I have ever known, Luther Reed. The kindest, the most honorable, the most loving. Our children are lucky to have you as their father, and I am lucky to have you as my husband. They sat together as the stars wheeled overhead and the night sounds of the ranch surrounded them. Somewhere in the darkness, cattle lowed softly. Closer by, the horses moved in their paddock, and from the house they could hear the faint sounds of Daniel and Emma talking quietly before sleep claimed them. This is perfect, Luther said. This moment right here. Everything I have ever wanted or needed. Perfect, Olivia agreed. The years that followed brought more changes. Daniel grew into a fine young man who shared his father's love for the land and his mother's gift with animals. He took on more responsibility around the ranch, and by the time he was 18, he was effectively Luther's partner in running the operation. Emma developed a talent for drawing and painting, creating beautiful images of the ranch and the surrounding landscape that Olivia had framed and hung throughout the house. In 1920, when Daniel was 20, he married a young woman from Randsburg named Catherine, and they moved into the house that Luther and Olivia had helped them build on the northern edge of the ranch property. 2 years later, Emma married a banker's son named Robert who had fallen head over heels for her during a visit to relatives in Randsburg. They settled in Los Angeles, where Robert's business was located, though Emma made frequent trips back to visit her parents. Luther and Olivia, now in their 40s, found themselves adapting to yet another new phase of life. They were no longer the young couple struggling to build something from nothing. They were established, respected grandparents to Daniel and Catherine's children. The ranch was thriving, profitable, a testament to decades of hard work and careful management. But more than any material success, Luther treasured the relationship he had with Olivia. 25 years of marriage had not dimmed their love, but had instead deepened it into something profound and unshakable. They could communicate without words, knew each other's moods and needs instinctively. They still made each other laugh, still found joy in simple pleasures like a shared meal or a walk through the property. You remember that first dinner we had together? Olivia asked one evening in 1923 as they sat on their porch, now weathered by years but still sturdy. You made beans and salt pork, and you were so apologetic about it. Luther laughed. I remember you offering to take over the cooking and thinking that was the best offer anyone had ever made me. It worked out well, Olivia said with a smile. I needed a home and you needed someone who could cook, plus all the love and companionship and children, of course. Of course, Luther agreed, his tone affectionate and teasing. The love was just a bonus. Just a bonus, Olivia repeated, laughing. Then her expression grew more serious. Luther, I want you to know something. If I could go back and change anything about my life, all the hardship, all the pain with the Olsons, everything I went through, I would not. Because all of it led me to you and to this life. It was worth every moment of suffering to end up here. Luther pulled her close, feeling emotion tighten his throat. I feel the same way, he managed. Every lonely year, every moment I spent wondering if I would always be alone, it was all worth it because it led me to you. They sat in companionable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in its nightly masterpiece of color. This was the life they had built together, brick by brick and day by day. It had not always been easy. There had been hard times, frightening times, moments when they had not been sure they would make it through. But they had persevered together, and the result was something beautiful and lasting. In 1925, 30 years after Olivia first came to the Reed Ranch, they decided to take a trip. It was something they had talked about for years, but never quite managed to do. Always too busy with the ranch or the children or some other obligation. But with Daniel fully capable of managing things in their absence, and both of them in relatively good health despite the passing years, they decided it was time. They went to San Francisco, taking the train and marveling at how much the world had changed since they were young. The city was a revelation, with its buildings that seemed to touch the sky and streets teeming with automobiles alongside horse-drawn vehicles. They stayed in a hotel that was fancier than anything either of them was accustomed to, with electric lights and running water and a doorman who greeted them each time they entered or left. But the highlight of the trip was not any of the city's wonders. It was simply the time they spent together, exploring this new place hand in hand, sharing meals in restaurants that served cuisine from around the world, talking for hours in their hotel room about everything and nothing. It reminded Luther of those early days when they had been falling in love, when every moment together felt new and precious. We should do this more often, Olivia said on their last night in the city. They were standing on the balcony of their hotel room, looking out at the lights of San Francisco twinkling in the darkness. Travel, I mean. See some of the world while we still can. I would like that, Luther agreed, though no place could be better than home. No, Olivia said, leaning against him. Nothing could be better than home. They returned to Randsburg refreshed and full of stories about their adventure. The grandchildren loved hearing about the city, about the buildings and the cable cars and the ocean that stretched to the horizon. Daniel and Catherine listened with polite interest, but Luther could tell they were perfectly content with their lives on the ranch, with no particular desire to see distant places. And that was all right. Everyone had to find their own path, their own version of happiness. For Luther and Olivia, happiness was here, in this place they had built together, surrounded by family and the land they loved. The years continued to turn. The 1920s gave way to the 1930s, bringing new challenges as the country struggled through economic depression. The Reed Ranch weathered the hard times better than many, partly through careful management and partly through the diversification Luther and Olivia had implemented over the years. The cattle operation, the horse breeding, Olivia's vegetable business, all these different income streams helped keep them stable when any one of them alone might have failed. They helped their neighbors when they could, offering work to men who needed it, buying livestock from families who were struggling, donating food to those who were hungry. It was what you did, Luther believed. You helped others when you could, because someone had to keep the bonds of community strong, especially in difficult times. In 1935, as Luther approached 60 and Olivia was not far behind, they decided to start transitioning more of the ranch responsibilities to Daniel. It was time, they both agreed. Daniel was more than capable, and both Luther and Olivia were beginning to feel their ages in ways they had not before. Luther's back ached more than it once had after a long day of work, and Olivia had developed arthritis in her hands that made fine motor tasks difficult some days. But they did not retire entirely. They still helped out where they could, still took walks through the property every evening, still sat on their porch and watched the sunset. They had earned this gentler pace of life after 4 decades of hard work, and they savored it. In 1938, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary with a small party attended by family and close friends. Emma and Robert came from Los Angeles with their 3 children, and Daniel and Catherine hosted the gathering at their house since it was larger and could accommodate more people comfortably. There were speeches and toasts, many of them teasing about how unlikely their union had seemed at first. A lonely rancher and an indentured servant who somehow built one of the most successful ranches in the region. Luther and Olivia laughed along with everyone else, but Luther found himself thinking about the deeper truth beneath the jokes. When it was his turn to speak, he stood with Olivia beside him and said, "40 years ago, I bought all the eggs from a young woman by the side of the road. It was the best purchase I ever made, because it led to me buying her freedom and, eventually, to her agreeing to marry me. People sometimes ask me if I regret spending that money, if I ever think about what else I could have done with those $400. And I always tell them the same thing, that money bought me everything that matters. It bought me love, family, happiness, purpose. It bought me a life worth living. Olivia, you are and always have been the best thing that ever happened to me. Here is to 40 more years." "I will be nearly 80 by then," Olivia said dryly, causing laughter. "But if you think you can keep up with me, then I accept." They shared a kiss while their children and grandchildren applauded, and Luther felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was what life was meant to be. Not perfect, not without challenges or sorrows, but full of love and meaning and connection. The next decade brought its share of difficulties. World War II touched even their distant corner of California, with young men from Randsburg going off to fight and families anxiously awaiting news from the front. The Reid family did not escape unscathed. One of Daniel's sons enlisted and served in Europe, coming home with wounds both visible and invisible. But he survived and he healed, and eventually he settled down with a young woman he had met in the Army hospital where he recuperated. Luther and Olivia provided what support they could during these years, opening their home to family members who needed a refuge, offering what wisdom they had gained through their own struggles. They had learned something valuable through their decades together, that love and persistence could carry you through almost anything, that there was strength in holding on to each other when the world seemed determined to tear you apart. In 1948, as they approached their 50th wedding anniversary, Luther began planning something special. Olivia's health had begun to decline in recent years, her arthritis worsening and her energy flagging in ways that worried him. He wanted to do something to show her how much she meant to him, something that would remind her of all they had built together. With Daniel's help, Luther arranged for a photographer to come out to the ranch to take pictures of the property and the family. It was a new technology that Luther found fascinating, the ability to capture moments in time and preserve them forever. The photographer spent a full day shooting, capturing images of the house, the barns, the cattle, the horses, the land stretching away to the mountains. But most importantly, he took photographs of the family, including one of Luther and Olivia standing together in front of the house, their hands clasped, their faces lined with age but their eyes still bright with love. When the photographs were developed and delivered, Luther had several of them framed and hung throughout the house. But his favorite, the one that made his throat tight with emotion every time he looked at it, was that image of him and Olivia. In it, he could see their whole story, all the years of struggle and triumph, all the love that had grown between them. It was proof that they had existed, that their love had been real and lasting, that they had built something worth preserving. Their 50th anniversary celebration in November of 1948 was larger than they had intended, with people coming from all over to honor them. The town of Randsburg organized a community dinner in their honor, and the mayor gave a speech about how the Reeds represented the best of what made America great: hard work, compassion, and commitment to family and community. Luther and Olivia sat at the head table, overwhelmed by the outpouring of affection. They had not realized how many lives they had touched over the years, how many people considered them friends or mentors or examples of what a marriage could be. "I had no idea people felt this way about us," Olivia whispered to Luther as yet another person came up to shake their hands and offer congratulations. "Neither did I," Luther admitted. "We were just living our lives the best way we knew how." "Maybe that is enough," Olivia said. "Maybe just living with love and integrity is the most important thing we can do." Luther thought about that as the celebration continued around them. Maybe she was right. Maybe all the grand gestures and big accomplishments were less important than the small, daily choices they had made to treat each other with kindness, to work together toward common goals, to keep choosing love even when it would have been easier not to. As the evening drew to a close and people began heading home, Luther and Olivia made their way slowly back to their own house. Daniel offered to drive them, but Luther refused. It was a clear night, not too cold, and he wanted to walk with his wife under the stars one more time. They moved slowly, their pace measured by age and Olivia's arthritis. But Luther did not mind. There was no rush, not anymore. They had all the time in the world. "Thank you," Olivia said as they walked, "for everything. For seeing me that day by the road, for buying those eggs. For paying off my debt. For giving me a chance at a real life." "Thank you," Luther countered. "For saying yes. For staying. For loving me and building this life with me. For being the best partner, the best wife, the best friend anyone could ask for." They reached their house and stood for a moment looking at it, this structure that had sheltered them through 50 years of marriage. It had been expanded and renovated over the decades, but the original building was still at its heart, the foundation Luther's father had laid still solid beneath everything they had added. "Come on," Olivia said, tugging gently at his hand. "Let us go inside and get warm." They went into their home together, closing the door on the cold night air. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming, filled with the accumulation of 50 years of life. Photographs and children's drawings, books and furniture, quilts that Olivia had made and tools that Luther had used. It was not fancy or grand, but it was theirs, and it was full of love. That night, lying in bed with Olivia curled against his side as she had done for 5 decades, Luther felt a peace that transcended description. His life had not been what he expected when he was young. It had been harder in some ways, but immeasurably richer in others. He had known loneliness and loss, but he had also known love so deep and true that it had transformed everything. He thought about that day in 1898 when he had spotted a young woman selling eggs by the road. He thought about the impulse that had led him to buy them all, and then to do something that most people would have considered foolish, spending $400 to free a complete stranger. At the time, he had not fully understood why he was doing it. He had told himself it was about compassion, about doing the right thing, and that was part of it. But looking back now, he could see that something deeper had been at work, some intuition that this woman would be important to him, that her freedom would somehow also mean his own. Luther. Olivia's voice was soft in the darkness. "Are you awake?" "Yes, what is it?" "I was just thinking about how lucky I am, how lucky we are, to have found each other, to have had all these years together. Not everyone gets that." "No," Luther agreed. "Not everyone does. We have been blessed." "Do you think it was fate?" Olivia asked. "That you came along that road on that particular day, that you decided to stop and buy those eggs?" Luther considered the question. "I do not know about fate," he said finally. "But I think sometimes we are given choices, moments where we can decide to be open to possibility or to close ourselves off. I chose to stop that day. I chose to see you, really see you, and to care about what I saw. And you chose to stay, to build a life with me. We kept choosing each other every day, even when it was hard. Maybe that is what matters most, not fate, but choice." "I like that," Olivia said. "I choose you, Luther Reed, today and every day. And I choose you, Olivia Reed, today and every day." They drifted off to sleep together, and Luther's last conscious thought was one of profound gratitude. He had been given a gift, this life with Olivia, and he had tried his best to be worthy of it. The years after their 50th anniversary passed more quickly than seemed possible. Luther and Olivia moved at an even slower pace now, content to let Daniel handle most of the ranch operations while they focused on spending time with their growing family. They had 7 grandchildren now, and 2 great-grandchildren, and nothing gave them more joy than when the house filled with family on holidays and special occasions. In 1952, Olivia's health took a turn for the worse. The arthritis that had plagued her for years became more severe, and she developed other ailments that left her weak and tired much of the time. Luther hired a nurse to come in and help, but he insisted on being his wife's primary caretaker. He cooked for her, helped her bathe and dress, read to her when her eyes were too tired to focus on the page. "You do not have to do this," Olivia protested one day as Luther gently brushed her hair. "We can afford to pay someone." "I do not have to," Luther agreed. "I want to. For 54 years, you have taken care of me. Let me take care of you now." Olivia's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded and let him continue his gentle ministrations. These quiet moments of care became some of Luther's most treasured memories, a way of showing his love when words seemed insufficient. In the spring of 1953, on a morning that dawned clear and beautiful, Olivia slipped away peacefully in her sleep. Luther woke to find her still and cold beside him, her face relaxed in an expression of peace. For a long moment, he just held her hand, unable to process what had happened. Then the reality crashed over him, and he felt as though someone had torn a piece of his soul away. The funeral was well attended, with people coming from all over to pay their respects to a woman who had touched so many lives. They told stories about Olivia's kindness, her strength, her unwavering love for her family. They spoke of how she had overcome terrible circumstances to build a beautiful life, how she had been an example to them all. Luther listened to it all as though from a great distance, numb with grief. He had known this day would come eventually. They had both been in their 70s, and Olivia's health had been declining. But knowing it intellectually and experiencing the reality of it were 2 entirely different things. After the funeral, Luther returned to the ranch house that suddenly felt cavernously empty. He walked through the rooms that he and Olivia had shared for more than half a century, touching the things she had touched, remembering moments they had shared in each space. In their bedroom, he found one of her dresses hanging in the wardrobe, and he pulled it out and held it to his face, breathing in the faint scent that still clung to the fabric. Daniel found him there an hour later, sitting on the bed with the dress in his lap, tears streaming down his face. "Dad," Daniel said gently, sitting beside him. "I am so sorry." 55 years, Luther said, his voice breaking. "We had 55 years together. It was not enough. It will never be enough." "No," Daniel agreed, "but you had those years. That is more than a lot of people get. You loved each other deeply and you built something beautiful together. That matters. That will always matter." Luther nodded, though the pain did not lessen. "I do not know how to be alone anymore," he admitted. "I have been part of a pair for so long. I do not remember who I was before her." "Then maybe you do not need to be alone," Daniel said. "Your home is always open to you, Dad. Catherine and I would love to have you stay with us." It was a generous offer and Luther appreciated it, but he knew he could not accept. This house, this ranch, was where he needed to be. It was where he could still feel Olivia's presence, where every corner held a memory of her. Leaving would feel like abandoning her, and he was not ready for that. "Thank you," he said to Daniel, "but I need to stay here. This is my home, our home." Daniel seemed to understand. He stayed with his father for the rest of the day, making sure he ate and offering quiet companionship. But eventually he left, and Luther was alone with his grief. The days that followed were the hardest of Luther's life. He moved through them mechanically, doing what needed to be done but feeling no joy in any of it. He ate because he had to, slept because exhaustion eventually claimed him, but everything felt muted and gray without Olivia beside him. But gradually, very gradually, the sharp edge of grief began to dull slightly. Luther started to remember not just the loss but the gift of the years they had shared. He would find himself smiling at memories. Olivia laughing at one of his jokes, Olivia teaching Emma to cook, Olivia standing up to Jonas Olsen with a gun in her hand and fire in her eyes. He began to understand that Olivia had not really left him. She was in every part of this ranch, in every choice they had made together, in their children and grandchildren who carried pieces of both of them forward into the future. She was in the house they had built, the land they had tended, the life they had created from nothing but determination and love. Luther continued to live at the ranch, though he scaled back his involvement in the day-to-day operations even more. He spent his time taking walks through the property, sitting on the porch where he and Olivia had passed so many evenings, working in the vegetable garden that Olivia had started so many years ago. He felt her presence in all these places, and it gave him comfort. He also spent time with his family, appreciating them in ways he might not have before. Each visit from Emma, each dinner with Daniel and Catherine, each interaction with his grandchildren and great-grandchildren became precious. They were Olivia's legacy as much as his own, proof that their love had created something that would outlive them both. In 1956, on what would have been their 58th wedding anniversary, Luther decided to write a letter to his family. His hands were shaky now, his writing not as clear as it once had been, but he wanted to get his thoughts down on paper while he still could. "To my beloved children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren," he wrote. "I am writing this to tell you about the most important thing I have ever done in my life, which was to stop and buy eggs from a young woman by the side of the road in August of 1898. That simple decision led to the greatest adventure I could have imagined, a life shared with your mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother, Olivia. She was the strongest, bravest, kindest person I ever knew. She took circumstances that would have broken most people, and used them to forge herself into something extraordinary. She built a home, raised children, ran a successful business, and loved with a generosity that transformed everyone around her. I want you all to know that the happiness I have known in my life was because of her. She took a lonely rancher and gave him a family, gave him love, gave him a reason to wake up every morning with gratitude. I was not a perfect husband, but I tried every day to be worthy of her, to give her the life she deserved after all she had been through. If there is one thing I want to leave you with, it is this: choose love. Choose it actively every single day. Love is not something that just happens to you. It is something you build through 1,000 small choices, through patience and compromise and forgiveness. Choose to see the best in your partner. Choose to stand by them when things get hard. Choose to celebrate their victories and support them through their defeats. Choose love and keep choosing it, and you will build something that lasts. That is what your mother/grandmother/great-grandmother and I did. We chose each other every day for 55 years, and I would do it all over again in a heartbeat. She was my greatest blessing, and I thank God for every moment I had with her. I miss her terribly, but I am also grateful beyond measure for the time we had. We built a good life together, and I am at peace with that. Love always, Luther. He sealed the letter and gave it to Daniel, with instructions that it should be shared with the whole family after he was gone. Daniel took it with tears in his eyes, understanding the significance of what his father had written. Luther lived for another 2 years after that, his health declining slowly but steadily. He spent his final days much as he had spent the years since Olivia died, quietly, with dignity, surrounded by the land and family he loved. On a mild evening in October of 1958, he went to sleep and did not wake up, passing peacefully at the age of 83. His funeral was as well attended as Olivia's had been, a testament to the impact he had made on his community. But the most moving moment came when Daniel read the letter Luther had written, his voice breaking as he shared his father's final message with the assembled family. They buried Luther next to Olivia in the small cemetery in Randsburg, under a shared headstone that read, Luther Reed and Olivia Owens Reed, beloved husband and wife. They chose love every day. The Reed Ranch continued on, passed down through the generations. Daniel ran it after his father's death, and when he was too old to continue, his children took over. The house was expanded and modernized, but the original structure remained at its heart, a reminder of where it all began. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun was setting and the desert air was cooling, family members swore they could feel the presence of Luther and Olivia there on the old porch. Not as ghosts or spirits exactly, but as something deeper. The love that had built this place, the choices that had created this family, the bond that had proven stronger than any obstacle. Their story became family legend, passed down to each new generation. The story of how a lonely rancher bought all the eggs from a young woman selling them by the road, and then bought her freedom too. How he offered her honest work and a chance at a new life. How they fell in love and built something lasting and true. It was a love story that proved love itself was a choice, one that had to be made over and over again. And in making that choice, Luther and Olivia Reed had created not just a successful ranch or a large family, but a legacy of love that would endure for generations to come. Their story was one of redemption and hope, of two people who saved each other and built a life that mattered. And that, in the end, was the greatest success of all.